Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to chair the final keynote, and it's a special pleasure to chair the keynote of Professor Thomas Sterling. So instead of mentioning or counting all his merits, awards, I'll just remind you of his famous closing remark a year ago. And he was talking about exascale. How fast are we approaching exascale computing? And he said, and many of us started to smile, he said, yes, there's light at the end of the tunnel. That's good news. And then he said, but the light is redshifted. Now, the same happened. Half of the audience actually laughed. So I said it's a good opportunity to explain what that means. You have to understand a little bit of astronomy or relativity, Einstein's laws of relativity. Redshifted light means you're going after an object, but it is disappearing faster than you can approach it. So what I hope you will hear in a few minutes, or hopefully at the end of his talk, whether now the light at the end of the tunnel is blue shifted, so we are getting closer to it. Okay. Thomas, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Frank. And it is a pleasure to be here again. It's a true honor and privilege for me to have the opportunity to give the last keynote address at ISC 2016. I want to thank the programming committee and the chairs for giving me this moment. Now I'm sensitive to the fact that I'm between you and the rest of your lives. So I will try not to burden you too much with long, extensive discussions. But this is a particularly interesting year, and I do have some thoughts to share with you. I want to thank the Maurer brothers and all the others for keeping us from Frankfurt. I'm running out of room for different Congress centers to put on this slide. I've done the count several times. I keep coming up with 13 years doing this. Yeah, well, somebody found a picture of me that looks as old as I feel. And I'm just thinking, what happens if you added another 13 years? Every year, we try to find a pithy phrase that captures the sense of that year. Sometimes it's pretty challenging, like when nothing happens, and yet you have to get excited. This was an easy year. It is clear that we are entering the age of 100 petaflops. And this is not just any single machine, but in fact an international direction and an acceleration that occurred after several years of what some perceive as stagnation. Let me just summarize for you briefly what I think are the trends and the highlights of the last year, and then I'll touch on some of them in greater detail. Well, as I said, the stagnation is over. I mean, really over. And there's no way around it. The Chinese dominate supercomputing big time. 100 petaflops is here. It's not something to be looking directly forward to. We have an unrolling of any number of systems over the next 2 to 3 years that will reach and surpass 100 petaflops. Those projects are already in order. But even as we move into the 100 petaflops era, there is a tremendous amount of planning in preparation for exascale computing, even as we are challenged to define what exascale truly means for the value of computing. I'm going to talk a little bit about the US program under the National Strategic Computing Initiative and the Exascale Computing Project. I also want to touch on, as I do every year, a new and really impressive deployment of systems in the broader community, not simply the 4 major users, but in fact in the broader world as well. And isn't it appropriate for me to be talking about Africa? In the area of advanced technologies and architectures, usually you find we talk about processor cores. It's a natural direction to migrate to, but this time I want to spend as much time on communication fabric architectures as well. And I'm going to talk about two very, very different cases there. I want to briefly give a shout out to a new and emerging community software stack that may serve for everyone. And I want to complete it by recognizing that supercomputing, as much as we love the iron and we spend a lot of time on the software, it really is about the end science, the end technology, the end society, and even defense projects and applications. And so I'd like to talk about one application in particular. And finally, before I proceed, I'd like to congratulate again all of those who have contributed to making this conference so successful. I learned just this afternoon that they have broken all records of attendance, and as of yesterday, achieved over 3,000 attendees. I think a round of applause is appropriate for... So let me spend a little time talking about an emerging technology with which maybe most of you are familiar, but I'd like to put it into perspective. Yes, I was lazy. Yes, I went out on Google. Yes, I grabbed some Intel slides. I found an Intel person said, "Is it okay?" They said okay. So whatever copyrights I have failed in. I am particularly interested in the fact that Intel, both incrementally against its prior methodologies for continuity's sake, but also for advancing the capabilities, is developing and has been deploying the OmniPath communication framework. Now, it's a bit of a balancing act, right? To say nothing's changing and everything's changing. So don't be scared, but be happy. And that's essentially the marketing pitch here. But there are a couple of aspects of the OmniPath architecture as it's emerging and becoming available that I think is worth mentioning. It is the two major things. The first is a high message rate. Now that, you might think of that as synonymous with bandwidth, and it's certainly correlated, but not necessarily. Getting big fat messages through is not such a big deal, but being able to move many more messages, which may mean more fine-grained messages, is particularly valuable, especially for those applications in the data analytics, graph processing, and machine learning applications, as well as future AI applications that we may find. If you can combine that, as they are doing with a low latency fabric to reduce the innate time from source to destination, then you've got a winning formula. Now, what of course is special about this is the combining of the OmniPath communication, which again, in fairness, is derived from several other technologies as well as through some innovations, and combining it with the next generation of their lightweight processor, this to be a Knights Landing. So Knights Landing is a significant processor on the order of 3 teraflops plus, depending on how you do counting on a per package basis. We'll see in a moment, I'll show you a simple diagram supporting out-of-core execution using a vector processing unit and supporting as much as 16 gigabytes of memory on a particular package. This is also including, I should have to flip through this. Notice I was doing that from memory, that's pretty impressive. This is, okay, I'm impressed. I'm easily impressed. If you look up in the upper right, you see that they have units of tiles. Some 36 such tiles can be on a particular package, each with 2 cores, and each of those with 2 vector processing units, and a megabyte. And this is an important number, if you can retain that towards the end of my talk, and a megabyte of L2 cache. The connection also, there's multiple connections to external memory and to the, although it doesn't show it on this diagram, to the OmniPath communication framework. Some pretty pictures. The actual reason for me showing you this slide is because the single thing that interests and excites me most about Knights Landing is it's moving off of the PCI bus, it's moving out of the quote-unquote accelerator category, and it's moving into the mainstream, the main part of the memory channel, and the phrase used is self-hosting. This, I think, is of a significant difference and puts us in a very different position in moving rapidly forward in easier to program and more efficient execution. One such machine in the United States that's being developed and will be deployed in the, I think, 2018 timeframe, if I have this right, is the Aurora machine to be deployed at the Argonne National Laboratory. This is a big machine, integrated by Cray, called the Shasta architecture. It's over 50,000 nodes and will peak out at about 180 petaflops of computing. The memory is about 7 petabytes, 7 versus 180, think about that, petabytes, and it will be using the next generation OmniPath. So Aurora is actually serving as a target for advancing the technology. It's dragging the technology forward. It'll be very interesting. It's also interesting because of a projected power budget of 13 megawatts. Now, that's very impressive when you realize that we're in the depending on how you do the numbers, we're at a much lower power level, say 30 plus, I'm trying to remember, 33, there we go, 33 petaflops impact RMAX at some 24, including cooling, megawatts of power. So I'd like to highlight a couple of systems. I spoke before, and I'd like to congratulate South Africa, CHPC, and Happy Sithole for their new machine. I'm going to pronounce it Lengao. I have no idea how close I got to the right name. It means cheetah in one of the 7 languages that are valid within South Africa. It's a petaflops peak machine. This is no small accomplishment. It's 15 times as much as the last machine that CHPC just took off the floor. It's RMAX is an effective 783 teraflops. I don't know where that puts it on the top 500 list. It has about 126 terabytes of main memory. There are some additional fat nodes for control. It's developed in combination with Dell and Intel and Mellanox in the development, obviously that part in communication. And it has about 4 petabytes of standing storage with a Lustre system. The bottom picture is one of my favorite pictures of Happy, if you know him. Oh, I guess that one's me too. Now, maybe you're not surprised about the machine in South Africa, but this one will probably surprise you. It's a couple of sigmas out, but it's an interesting machine because it's recognized, as we all do, that the key challenge to the future of scalable high-performance computing is, in fact, data movement. And that historically we have been using a framework in which heavyweight messages have been used to maximize the effective bandwidth of the communication fabric and framework. The data vortex computer is a very different animal. It is created around a new class and a very different class of communication network, known as data vortex, built by a company known as Data Vortex. All right, they didn't have a lot of people, they couldn't come up with a lot of names. The Data Vortex is focused on lightweight, fine-grained messages. In fact, very fine-grained. Each payload is only 64 bits, with an address space also of 64 bits, so that's quite on the edge. It's a high-radix, high-bandwidth network with both low latency and it's contention-free. That contention-free is actually a piece of magic, which is very cool. Now, why am I bringing up a machine in which there are only a few sales to date, and in fact, relatively modest configurations have been deployed? It's the promise, it's the potential of this graph. This is the classic S-curve graph that we should all be familiar with conventional networks. The two S-curves you see are taken from data using different tests on InfiniBand. This is no discredit or disrespect to InfiniBand, by the way. But that red line, if you look towards the left, where the payloads, the packets, are very small, the red line putatively does not decrease, does not reflect that S-curve that you would expect. It gets a larger, the lightweight messages for very special cases, it gets a dramatically larger percentage of the total available bandwidth in the communication fabric. Now, if you look out towards the right, you see that for heavyweight, very heavyweight messages, more conventional techniques achieve higher bandwidths. So this is if not domain specific, it's a domain narrow machine, but there are a wide range of applications that are particularly well suited for this class, and that in fact will benefit from this perhaps more than any other. Here's just some lightweight data points. On the left you see near the top some blue data points, reflecting again the relative narrowness or modesty of the scale of the machines. And how these, in fact, are going to scale out with larger systems is still unclear, although the analytical projections are very impressive. But you can see how significantly different these memory-intensive, lightweight, dynamic, and irregular messages seem to be, even empirically. So the U.S., I struggled to have a phrase that would let me take some sort of positive approach to this and still be honest. The U.S. is in launch mode towards Exascale. Shortly after ISC 15, by executive order by the President of the United States, the National Strategic Computing Initiative was declared, was launched. The National Strategic Computing Initiative, or NSCI, is national in the sense that it's whole government. Many of the agencies that both drive research, either overall or towards specific missions, or those agencies which are end users of high-performance computing in many ways are involved. Also involved are the national laboratories and centers, but as well both industry and academia, to move the technologies forward to advance multiple forms of high-end computing in architecture and software stacks, methods for programming and for overall systems control. This is a 10-year program. The U.S. isn't very good at doing 10-year programs. Even getting to the moon didn't take us 10 years. And this is often referred to casually as the moonshot for computing. Now, there are a number of motivations or drivers, one of which is the unification of both conventional numeric or technical computing, as it may be called, with data-intensive, data-oriented, graph-based methods for data analytics, deep machine learning, and other problems associated with irregular and varying data structures. One of the objectives, and I highlighted it in red, is to keep the U.S. at the forefront of HPC capabilities. That's what it says. Of course, there's an underlying assumption there, which I'll leave to you. The key is to make HPC readily available well into the performance regime of Exascale or exaflops, and over in as much as into 20-year time frame. This is a Herculean task. It is challenging, it is aggressive, it is ambitious, and a little bit scary. To achieve this, one of the major efforts is the Department of Energy, and the Department of Energy is one of the lead federal agencies in the U.S. government, the Department of Energy's Exascale Computing Project. The DOE is very sensitive about the term project. It's not synonymous with program, not synonymous with initiative. Project means a very specific, rigorous, carefully regulated, highly professional, industrial grade activity to lead to the end result. There are 4 major activities which are still being defined in detail. For those of you who had the opportunity to hear on Tuesday Paul Messina's talk, Paul is in fact leading, I don't know whether it's chair or director or czar of ECP, but Paul gave a very lucid talk on this. The 4, as you might expect, is application development. And application development is more than merely figuring out how to run codes on the machine. It's in fact to define the driver requirements for those very machines through a process of code design. Code design has become an important mantra, a cliche, but it's one to which the contributing partners, the stakeholders, are committed to as a viable way to do quantitatively driven and managed projects of this type. The software technology is incredibly important. While the technologies must be near enough so that we can have risk-mitigated opportunities for actually achieving operational and deployable systems. At the same time, they must bring in advanced capabilities that supersede those that we're using today. And those are in the area of processor architectures, memories, both devices and structures, and finally, as I mentioned before, communication fabrics. And so this brings us to the hardware technologies in these areas that are recognized as likely but have yet to be fully proven or deployed. And so there are tasks related to this that will help industry, motivate industry to extend those technologies forward in time for appropriate deployment in the 2023 timeframe. And finally, there's the development of the exascale systems themselves. These are complex, likely to be heterogeneous, and heterogeneous doesn't just mean necessarily accelerators. It means heterogeneous memory systems and subsystems and control paradigms for computing. They will certainly support conventional practices or incremental changes to conventional practices, and those are likely to be the way that, at least in the US, initial exascale achievement will be accomplished. But there may underline the more advanced or more innovative approaches that at least will be fruitful for certain classes of problems which will become increasingly important to high-performance computing in general, and frankly to the U.S. mission objectives in particular. So, in the last year, we lost Marvelous Marvin. Not a tragedy, he was 88 years old, but in another 88 years, his work and his impact and I think recognition will still be as rich as it is today. Marvin Minsky is, for all intents and purposes, both the father of and synonymous with the term artificial intelligence in the same way that Seymour Cray is synonymous with the word supercomputing. Now, he worked closely with Newell and McCarthy. I think McCarthy actually coined the term AI. And in the early years of the 50s, the 60s, and 70s, laid the foundation. He won essentially every award one can win, including the Turing Award in 1969, which is essentially the Nobel Prize for in computer science. Nobel wasn't smart enough. In fact, he didn't like mathematicians, but he didn't have a Nobel Prize in computer science. There weren't any computers back then. Marvin, you may wonder, why am I talking about Marvin Minsky in the supercomputing conference? Well, he's one of the great computer scientists, period. But he was also a very strong influence on the development of one of the world's most famous SIMD machines. The commercially deployed one, the CM2, was in fact a predecessor of what might be considered to be the prototype, the CM1. The CM1 was not developed to be a numeric-intensive machine, although the CM2 and its follow-on, the CM5, were increasingly oriented towards numeric computing. The CM1 was actually developed as an AI machine, in particular to be a smart memory that held semantic nets. But there's another reason I I acknowledge and bring to your attention the passing of Marvin Minsky. It's because, in all likelihood, and we're seeing it already at this meeting, probably one of the biggest, maybe ultimately the biggest application or class of application for supercomputing will not be floating dense matrix floating point, will not even be large data processing to do pattern recognition and to do clustering. It will in fact be symbolic computing, the creation of machines that think. More importantly, the creation of machines that understand. And as many advances that are made today in the area of what is called artificial intelligence and machine learning, let's acknowledge the fact that machines don't learn anything. We learn. If they learned, they would not just have data converted to information in pretty pictures, they would have data converted from information to knowledge and be able to manipulate that knowledge. We are not there yet. There's still an exciting world in front of us, and Marvin Minsky already set the path forward. He was back in the days mostly where money was a lot freer in the United States, before the Berlin Wall came down. He didn't really watch the political correctness. When asked how would humans exist or coexist with intelligent machines, he said, if we're lucky, they'll keep us as pets. A few years ago, I was going through some slides and I saw, I'm a Star Trek fan, I'm sorry, I admit it. I saw Star Trek The Next Generation, which was the only good one, right? Yes. And there was Mr. Data, or Commander Data. I trust most of you know who I'm speaking of. Please help your friends understand this. Okay, here's the scary thing. He was the epitome of artificial intelligence. Yes, with its positronic brain, thank you, Asimov. He was holding a cat. If the smart machines can find other pets, they may not need us. Marvin Minsky also said, in a somewhat more sanguine moment, he said that, yes, intelligent machines will take over the world, but they will be our children. An interesting thought. As always, we as a community continue to move forward, and although the accomplishments are at a very rapid rate, we take a moment to acknowledge some of those contributions from many of our colleagues. Matteo Valero, who's director of the Barcelona Supercomputing Center and professor at the Technical University of Catalonia, beg your pardon, won the Cray Award in recognition of seminal contributions to vector, out-of-order, multi-threaded, and VLIW architecture. Alexandre Soleil, another colleague, at Johns Hopkins University, the director of the Institute for Data Intensive Services, was awarded the Sidney Fernbach Award for his outstanding contributions to the development of data-intensive computing systems and on the application of such systems in many scientific areas, including astrophysics, turbulence, and genomics. And I will tell you, I know Alex personally, and I have to say that given his extraordinary breadth of accomplishment and its impact on the community, there has probably not been a more understated statement of credit to him. My friend and colleague Kathy Yellick of both the UC, University of California, Berkeley campus, and the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, won the Ken Kennedy Award for advancing programmability of HB systems, strategic national leadership, and mentorship in academia and national labs. Working with Kathy is an absolute delight. I have known her for many years. We co-authored one of her two books, the one on UPCs. She also developed the language Titanium. Bill Carlson also on the UPC book. I'm sorry. Okay, now we're going to see if the red button works. They promised it would. Look at that. All right, and finally, the Turing Award was given both to Whitfield Diffie and Martin Hellman for their critical contributions to modern cryptography. All extraordinary accomplishments. Now, imagine I've gotten this far without actually doubling down on what we're all thinking and what we're all talking about. So the elephant in the room. Jack Dungara taught me to say Tai Hu light. To my Chinese colleagues, I hope that is at least near the right pronunciation. Peak performance, 125 petaflops, 10 million cores. I should stop there. A very respectable 73% efficiency on LINPACK at 93 petaflops delivered, and this with a fairly light clock rate of 1.45 gigahertz, which I suspect is largely responsible for a truly extraordinary power budget of only 15 megawatts. Well, 15 megawatts is a lot, right? I mean, 1 million euros per megawatt year, I think is the rule of thumb. Just think how many windmills that is going around. But this is on the order of, I should have had a number somewhere that said 6 equivalent peak of 6 gigaflops per watt. Okay, for Exascale, we've got to get up to something like 50, that's 50. But this is a very impressive step forward. This machine is at the Supercomputing Center in, okay, here goes nothing, Wuxi? Oh, come on. Somebody, they promised not to laugh. That wasn't a joke. All right. To my colleagues there, congratulations. The vendor is NRC PC. Through various channels, I absconded with Barrow, ultimately with his permission, Jack Dungara, this diagram of a node of the Taihu system. The node comprises 4 different clusters, each of 64 cores. Each of those cores themselves, I have to remember this, is a SIMD an 8-way SIMD architecture, a 64-bit floating point. Each of those cores peak performance at over 11 gigaflops. They're all tied together. They have 64 kbytes of scratch pad, and while they have a small instruction cache of, I'm sorry, 64K? Do I have that right? Okay, thank you. Is it 16 kbytes of instruction cache? All right. Listen, I didn't have these numbers like until 3 days ago. Okay. They also have each management processing element in each of the core groups with a total of almost 41,000 nodes in this. It's designed by the Shanghai High Performance IC Design Center. Pretty picture I grabbed here. You get the idea. Some 40 cabinets. Each with about 3 petaflops, 4 super nodes per cabinet, 256 nodes per supernode, a 3-level hierarchy. But one of the pleasures I get from having this opportunity to speak to you on the very last day is I get to tell you what I think. So I'm going to tell you what I think, then I'm going to tell you why that's wrong, then I'm going to tell you why in fact right. Shouldn't confuse you. Okay, shock and awe. There is a wow factor here. You know, let's sit back and really enjoy this for a moment. It's been a quiet few years, folks. And this is just a tour de force in terms of engineering. It's almost, in fact, 3 times the performance of their previous and our #1 machine, Tianhua 2, which held that position for 3 years in a row. For me, even more impressive is the fact that this is a China homegrown system. They designed the architecture, both structure and instruction set. They designed and deployed the electronics, and they did the systems integration. There are some parts which are contributed from outside, but I'll tell you all of our big machines back in the States probably have some memory that wasn't homegrown, so I don't think anyone's going to say anything about that. And it's running some serious applications. In fact, I'm told that the 3 Gordon Bell Prize finalists have run on this machine, which is really something to take note of. Also impressive is the fact, and you will have heard this if you were here for Eric's talk on the first day, China now has the largest number of deployed systems, 167, surpassing US at 165 deployed systems. And while the specific numbers don't matter, this indicates a key commitment. A commitment not just to having the high stature machines, but rather to having a large number of medium scale systems doing a lot of the heavy lifting of high performance computing. And as I've already said, 15 megawatts is very impressive. And I did say 6 gigaflops per watt. And it comes with the full software stack. Okay, that's what the brochure is saying, right? I'm looking forward to hearing, maybe from people here in the audience over the next year, just how many times they hit a seg fault or some equivalent problem. But it looks like it is, in fact, the real thing, a full package, and it's open. They say it's open. I look forward to the international community telling me about their applications on that system. Okay, but let's be clear, not so fast, right? In terms of memory capacity, it's pretty lightweight. With 125 petaflops of peak performance, it has about 1/100th that amount in terms of memory capacity, 1.3 petabytes. And I made up the phrase inverse capacity because I didn't want to do 1 to 100. Maybe that wasn't a good idea. The bandwidth also, in terms of the rate at which information is transferred from the memory versus the peak rate of computing, that 22.4 flops per byte transferred is, let's say it's just pushing out from where we were. Jack reports that the HPCG, the conjugate gradient benchmark that is proving very realistic in exercising more parts of the machine, is below 1% of its LINPACK number. I'm looking for Jeff. Did I? Okay. He'll scream out if I say something really stupid. The bisection bandwidth is considered by the clock rate, of course, as I said, is under 1.5 gigahertz. You may be wondering what that, what the gentleman in the picture is holding. I'm not exactly sure. I am confident of this. It is a gray square. I got that right. Yes. Okay. I'm presuming this is in fact the node of the four clusters. Okay, so am I right or am I right? But not so fast. Yeah, I made that up too. Technology is forcing us into a new class of optimization, which we are reluctant, in some sense, intransigent in pursuing. But historically, if we look past over the last 60 plus years, we see that as technology demands, we define new methodologies and new architectures. So we have proceeded, and in fact, been through what by my count, is about 6 different epochs with key points of delineation, moving from one paradigm to another paradigm. Perhaps I use the word paradigm a little bit too freely here. But as we have moved since, well, over the last decade now, into the era of multi-core, multi-era, with strong emphasis on heterogeneous computing, we've all known that we've moved away from the more conventional and frankly more comfortable communicating sequential processes model and other techniques that we've done. So it behooves us to ask the question, what is technology trying to tell us? And one is that FPU, floating point unit efficiency, is not the critical objective function. It was when I was as young as many of the people in this room, but it's not today. It is among the easiest things to manufacture and to deploy. And so we should be making a lot of them everywhere. It's the memory capacity and the memory bandwidth that counts, I think. But probably I should be slipping the word latency in there somewhere as well. And then I keep on going on and rattling on about overheads, which I'm not going to do. It's the instruction issue rate that counts, because it's the instruction issue rate that drives the memory bandwidth. and ultimately determines the time to solution. And while we may argue about different metrics of performance, I'm very comfortable in saying ultimately, by whatever normalizing criterion you're using, time to solution is a solid one. It's one we can measure. The physics speaks to us through that. And it's, I'm sorry, it's what counts. It's the power and the power efficiency that we have to move to and improve upon. We routinely waste die area by building enormous memory hierarchies on the chip for one purpose, and then adding speculative execution in many different forms, to including pre-fetching, speculative fetching, branch prediction, and any number of other mechanisms in architecture. To do what? To keep the ALU busy. We can put a lot more ALUs that will run a lot less efficiently if we clean up all that mess. That's what the Chinese Taihu machine is doing, is attempting to do. So we should have, perhaps, we should be valuing the FPU availability, not the utilization. This machine does that. And by the way, it was merely 8 years ago that I stood on this same virtual stage congratulating Andy White and his colleagues from Los Alamos for the deployment of what was putatively referred to as the first petaflops machine. That is, with the cell architecture and Roadrunner. Roadrunner is a bird that runs around in New Mexico. It would be a roadrunner if it had a road. Unkindly, sometimes the roadrunner is referred to as a flightless bird, which may be an unkind, perhaps appropriate metaphor here for the machine. The cell architecture, and you're very familiar with the cell architecture, or your children are if they have or had a PlayStation 4, but I don't do much of my work on PlayStations. And there were no significant additional machines like Roadrunner, and we went on to a different class of machine. But we've been here before. And so the question we have, and I'm not going to answer this question, is going back to the idea of scratchpad memory, little or no cache, many independent threads, where no one thread has a high efficiency or high utilization, but the aggregate of those threads maximizes the effective use of the memory. Is that, in fact, a new formula to go forward? I asked you to pay attention to some of the numbers when I was discussing the Nice Landing processor and chip. You know, as a homework assignment, go back and do that comparison. You'll find some interesting similarities and some pivotal distinctions. I look forward to my talk next year. I'm assuming I get invited, and I'll be able to report. Okay, so last year, struggling to find something creative to say, I put forth other people's notion of a two-world view of high-performance computing. So I thought I better do something more advanced. So I now put forth a three-world high-performance computing system view. I don't promise next year would be a fourth world. We've mined the incredibly deep amount of data from the top 500 list over at least the last 10 years and done some simple linear regression optimization on three parts. And recognize that these three lines, in a very excellent way, allow us to define, specify, and distinguish in a much simpler way the complex top 500 data, and perhaps for some utilization. So these are the three-world view. At the bottom are the average ARM, well, all of these are for average ARMAX. The bottom is the mainstream perspective that I saw, that long horizontal line that you saw. The very steep vertical line that I refer to as leadership computing is almost 2 orders of magnitude higher, and in the middle, with some noise in it, is what we're referring to, for lack of better, as the knee part of the world, or the knee world there. We find that these are clearly distinguishing, discriminating characterizations, and think that this may help us to understand better than just thinking about the top 10 or not the top 10 as we go forward. Okay, as I draw to a close, I would like to at least finish with an accomplishment, an application, a workload that is having immediate impact in this case, in our understanding of reality. But first I need to go back and take a look at a piece of history. In 1887, I didn't take this picture, by the way. In 1887, the then expert in measuring the speed of light, Michelson, and a colleague of his, Morley, who was a chemist, with an absolute irrelevancy to tell you that, decided to both detect, to prove the hypothesis of the existence of the ether, and to measure it by explaining the movement of the Earth through the ether, and then detecting and measuring the change in the speed of light. This doesn't have a happy ending. Michelson was completely disappointed in the result and never really believed them. And Morley, by the way, that's floating on a bed of mercury, liquid mercury here. This is important because Morley died of mercury poisoning. Not one of the best problems. Now, of course, anyone who has gone to a physics high school class, at least outside of the U.S., knows the reason is because Ethernet. I mean the ether. Sorry. I'm getting to the end. It's almost there. The ether doesn't exist. Hence, at least it shows the accuracy of his measurement. Okay. Now, if you were so unfortunate as to, in the U.S., go to what was laughingly referred to as science class, you will have learned that the sun is 6,000 years old, that it goes around a flat Earth. On the Earth, slow, dim-witted Republicans were being walked all over by dinosaurs, which I suspect, and this is just conspiracy theory, is why the dinosaurs weren't allowed to get on the ark. And you'd also learn that the climate is just fine, thank you. Long live coal, and we all better learn how to swim. Move forth over a century from the Michelson-Morley experiment, we have essentially the same experiment here, with a slightly scaled up version of the original interferometer. Okay, more than slightly. Those are approximately mile-long legs. There are two of them, not one. One in Hanford, Washington, and the other in Livingston, Louisiana. This is the LIGO, or the Laser Interferometric Gravitational Observatory, and I may, in previous talks, have mentioned that after spending more money on an NSF experiment than any other over 10 years, and achieving exactly 0 results, that the NSF amusingly added more money to it. Boy, was I wrong. In just a few months ago, I think it was September in the event, gravitational waves were discovered. One of the great discoveries in the history of human science and technology, combining the extraordinary accuracy of an instrument to measure perturbations in space-time smaller than the size of a proton, and be able to extract that signal and correlate it against two different systems. Now, what was determined was that the event that they were watching was a collision of two spiraling black holes into each other, and the result was kaplowy. That's a technical term. I don't know what the units are. Here you had two objects, one about 29 solar masses, another 36 solar masses, coming together and through accretion and creating a new black hole of 62. Now, if you do the math quickly in your head, you're wondering where those 3 solar masses went. Well, in a matter of tens of milliseconds, they turned into energy and were translated into perturbation of the space-time continuum. More power was released in that fraction of a second than all the rest of the power in the known universe combined. This is an extraordinary discovery, akin to the discovery of the Higgs boson, complicated, Higgs boson by the Large Hadron Collider, and 10 years ago, the discovery of the acceleration of the expansion of the universe itself. Every one of these involved important and large-scale instruments, but they also involved supercomputing. Without supercomputing, they would not have been possible. Here are the actual signals that were detected. Supercomputing not only to detect the signals, but in the case of detecting gravitational waves, the filter or the templates used to extract those signals have to be pre-computed from the original physics, the foundational principles, in some cases using numerical relativity, in order to find the patterns of the signals that would imply or determine an actual gravitational event. So, in conclusion, I'm not going to summarize what I've just said. Rather, I would like to leave us with a question, a serious question. And I'd like to talk about supercomputing, what I call supercomputing in the shadows, or shadow of supercomputing. This is an exceptionally successful meeting. The floor continues to grow. I learn things every time I come to this meeting. And of course, the second event in November in the United States. We are the HPC community, but do we in fact represent high-performance computing? HPL, and I'm a big supporter of HPL. I love the data. It's a beautiful data set. I'm beginning to sound like someone else. The data set is huge. The data set is so successful you get bored. I'm sorry. But HPL is self-selecting. We only see what others want us to see. They, and we are they decide whether or not to send in their numbers. They decide whether to run the benchmarks at all. This is not a good sampling strategy. Anybody who understands simple statistics knows that this is not the way to do it. There is a whole world of high-performance computing hidden in the clouds. And of course, I'm being metaphorical here. Amazon, Google, Microsoft, some of you may know how big those systems are. I don't. But they are enormous, and we don't see them through our methods of evaluation. Sometimes they're hidden by intent. The intelligence community, and I'll just say this, I've been in the basement. There. The financial and banking, they don't like to give that information. And in general, the defense community. Some of this is enormous, quite possibly dwarfing what we view. And finally, there are special purpose devices being used, such as the Anton machine. Some years ago, John Salmon, I think, gave one of the plenary keynote addresses on Anton for n-body problems, specifically for molecular dynamics. And the SKA is developing a very complex configuration of a multiple computer system in order to manage and process all of that tremendous data, looking forward to the results from that. I mean, I ask, how would we run LINPACK on a quantum computer? So, I really leave you with this question. Do we really know how fast computing is? And if not, how should we as a community broaden our reach, our perspective, to quantify and evaluate the trends in technology, the trends in architecture, the trends in applications that span the entire set of what high-performance computing is and will be. Thank you all very much for your time and patience.
Okay, Mr. Sterling, Thomas Sterling will take some questions. Please. There's a microphone.
A lonely microphone.
So let me at least ask you one question.
Okay.
And
We've been through this before.
I'm grateful that you mentioned astronomy, relativity, and the obvious question is, Thomas, is there now blue light at the end of the tunnel?
I think that's a fair statement. I think that the light at the end of the tunnel is indeed blue shifted. I don't know what the second derivative is, but I do know that we can be satisfied at this meeting that we saw a quantum step forward and moving toward goals of ever increasing computing capability and application opportunity. Again, thank you all very much.